Thank you, Rosa, and thank you for inviting me here. Nice meeting you all, and a lot of familiar faces because many of you took part in the breakout session on Wednesday on biosimilars in the shortage workshop. And thanks for having for those of you who were there, I can tell you, for those of you who weren't there, I can tell you we had a very lively discussion and a lot of good feedback. Maybe not so much on shortages, maybe more on biosimilars and interchangeability, but that doesn't matter. I think it was very, very fruitful. The session on biosimilars within the shortage meeting had the aim of understand stakeholders' experiences on shortages of biological medicines and whether biosimilars could be a way of ameliorating or preventing shortages of biological in general. We spent some time talking about the work of the HMA working group of biosimilars to be distinguished from the biosimilars working party, which is the more scientific working party of the agency that deals with scientific advice and approval of biosimilars. The HMA group is, as the name said, linked to heads of medicines and have more impact on implementation of biosimilars. A lot of this links to discussion on national level on pricing and reimbursement and so forth. And that leads into the, I was about to say, famous statement on our website of interchangeability of biosimilars. But just a little bit of background and just to make things right and what we are talking about. Interchangeability is by definition, changing one medicines for another. And in the context of biologicals and biosimilars, we talk about interchangeability when you switch from the reference product to the biosimilar or vice versa, or if you switch or interchange between two biosimilars or more biosimilars that all has the same reference product. That is something we, and anybody else is welcome to have a meaning about interchangeability, but that's something that we can talk about here as a European agency. When it comes to member states and prescribers, then switching is one thing. That is a prescriber-led decision of changing the medicines for a patient to something else. And that is taking place every day. Either you switch the patient to something to avoid side effects, or you change them to another drug to improve the therapy, or you just changed biosimilars, change from originator product to a biosimilar to save money for your healthcare system. And on top of that, member states can decide on substitution policies, even automatic substitution, like many member states already have for small molecule generics. And we see increasingly this is also happening for biosimilars. So just to summarize the evidence behind coming out with an interchangeability statement is that we already know that switching between biologicals, non-biosimilar biologicals, is very rarely associated with adverse reaction. So changing from one biological therapy for, let's say, rheumatoid arthritis to another biological therapy for rheumatoid arthritis, that change in itself does very rarely lead to anything dangerous for the patient. It may even be a reason to change because you want to improve therapy due to existing antibodies. The way biosimilars and the scientific rationale for all the biosimilar concept in Europe is that a biosimilar has to be highly similar to its reference product. So highly similar in the sense of how the molecule's physiochemical is characterized, how it behave in different assays, and of course also with clinical trials to rule out any differences in safety and efficacy. So there has been a lot of studies because one of the concerns early on was, do we need to do switching studies? And today, the level of knowledge is switching studies do not make us more wise. There has been done a lot of switching studies and even multiple switch studies, which have not been able to pick up any difference in efficacy and safety between the reference product and the biosimilar, or multiple switches between biosimilars. And a couple of years ago, we looked into our pharmacovigilance database, and at that time we had more than 1.3 million patient years experience with patients switching from reference product to biosimilars without any sign of change in side effects. So we feel very confident that changing from a reference biological to its biosimilar or between biosimilars with the same reference product is a safe practice. And therefore, in September last year, we published, together with the heads of medicines agency, this statement on interchangeability of biosimilars, referencing 5 publications, scientific publications that has looked into this, and very detailed, going into all the details associated with switching and what I just summarized very, very quickly. That statement came out, and there was not much attention. The biosimilar industry congratulated it, and the originator industry was a little bit concerned, and that was where it all ended. Then we got some feedback from both here. We got questions to our communication department, and we also collected questions received at member states, which led us into developing a Q&A document. And currently the Q&A document is addressing 3 questions, namely, how frequently can you switch? Does this only cover one switch, or is multiple switching allowed? And the answer is yes. The other question was, is there a difference whether we talk about a rather simple molecule, let's take growth hormone and insulin at one end of the spectrum, or a very complex fusion protein at the other end? And again, the answer is it doesn't matter. Switching is not what we regard as associated with any risk in terms of change of efficacy or safety. And then a question, does the statement of EMA's website, does that have a national impact? Does it mean that I can be switched in my country? And the answer is we don't know, or no, this has no impact. This is a national decision whether you would allow switching or even going a step further for substitution. And this is, of course, work in progress, because guess we already got 2 more questions to address, or maybe even 3 more questions. And the CHMP has also made us need to update this due to a recent approval of a biosimilar where there are slight differences in the excipients between the reference product and the originator product, excipients that will not have any impact on the general patients, but may have an impact in a few very, very rare patients who have a very rare enzyme defect, and therefore there need to be warnings, so the product information will slightly differ, and we will have to amend our general statement to underpin that prescribing, and also prescribing biosimilars, you always need to consult the product information. So switching is not something you can do by switching off your brain. You still need to read the product information and do proper care of your patients, and patients need to read the insert leaflet. So this is work in progress. So the meeting we had on Wednesday was preceded by a survey, and this is, of course, from a scientific perspective, not an impressive survey with 26% responding. I was told this was good because normally we only get 10% responding, so you can say this is exceeding our expectations. But on the other hand, it's limited what we can say. But on the other hand, in retrospect, the issues that came up and the observations from this pre-meeting survey nicely reflected what we ended up discussing in the meeting. And still a need to more information about biosimilars. Maybe not so much about what is a biosimilar, but more the details, the nuances about switching and differences, and concerns around safety, concerns around differences in devices, because that's a big issue when patients change. It's not so much about getting a biosimilar product. It's more all the issues related that biosimilar may be delivered in another device, which also on the healthcare side gives a lot of challenges, because you then have to instruct patients, and that they divert some extra cost and resources and so forth. So more detailed discussion about biosimilars and related issues. Experiences with shortages. There has been shortages across Europe, also shortages of biosimilars, and I think many of the participants in the workshop was of the the position that having access to not only one biosimilar, but multiple biosimilars to one reference product could potentially increase competition and lower the risk of running into shortages. But having just a single biosimilar would most likely not make the day in terms of preventing shortages. There were, in general, trust in interchangeability, but of course, I was about to say, of course, there were still some concerns raised, and especially concern raised from participants who came from therapeutic areas where biosimilars do not exist at the moment or where they are about to be introduced. And that, I think, is also a learning here, that the gastroenterologist and the rheumatologist who now have access to biosimilar monoclonal antibodies for 10 years or more, they are comfortable here. But when we move into new therapeutic areas, we are starting a little bit all over again and have to explain. And there could be some learning exercise from the experience from one therapeutic area to another, both among physicians and among patients. So we hope to be able to build a little bit on that moving forward. The breakout session, as said, was very lively, and I may have already summarized most of it on the previously site. Again, it was no doubt, as said, there's an extensive both scientific and now also clinical experience. I have to remind you that it's almost 20 years ago we approved the first biosimilar. Next year it will be 20 years. We approved the first biosimilar in Europe, and we are ahead of the rest of the world here in terms of implementing them in clinical practice. There is still need for timely communication, and the basis for that communication is to build trust in biosimilars and build trust in interchangeability of biosimilars. Consistent messaging. Many of your organizations, I'm looking at you now, Bear, have spent a lot of effort in developing guidances and material towards healthcare professionals and patients in understanding biosimilars and building trust in biosimilars. And it would be important, whoever, and then I could be looking at myself, the heads of medicines agency work group, who go into developing more information material, that we make sure that there is a consistent messaging there and definitely no contradicting messaging. So the more we can build on the same, the better. Concerns about interchangeability, we still need to do that. And some of the concerns that came up was related to off-label use. And as you all already know, dealing with off-label use is very complicated for us, because that's basically doctors doing something outside what we approved. So we a little bit turn our blind eyes to what is happening, but sometimes we need to we need to address it. And we've seen some shortages situations, has nothing to do with biosimilars, where the shortage is mainly driven by lack of availability for off-label use. But that's another story. I can entertain you if you were allowed to have coffee, but you don't have coffee today. So that's going to be some other day, Rosa. There is difference in speed and access of biosimilars across Europe. This is driven by many different things. Some is driven by how member states deal with this. I think one of the learning was that the member states who have been extremely good at implementing biosimilars, they are waiting for the biosimilars to come. They engaged early with the manufacturers. They engage and say, we would like to, and they put measures in place to implement the biosimilars, whereas other member states have a more laid-back position, and they are waiting for the biosimilars to come, and then they look into this. So they're different, and there are also different barriers in terms of acceptability and pricing and reimbursement issues. We had a very brief discussion about the sustainability of the biosimilar concept, because one of the worrying things is, if you look into if you look 5 years into the future, looking at biological medicines that will lose their patent protection in the coming 5 years, for half of them, there is no biosimilar in development. So that could mean that these products will not get into biosimilar competition in 5 years' time. And that is, of course, a question, why is this happening? Some of it might be explained that these biologicals are biologicals for very rare diseases, so the business model is not really working. Another explanation might be that the competition in the biosimilar fields are so high that biosimilar industry cannot really make a business case for developing products here. And that's of course a concern, because then we might end up in a situation where member states cannot, both in terms of shortages and maybe also finances, can have access to more biologicals. Health technology and payers were supportive of biosimilarity and interchangeability. Again, one of the issues that came up there was the switching issue. And then I think important, some of the HTA folks highlighted that they understood that from a regulatory perspective, generics, small molecules, is regulated in one way and biosimilars in another way, which is linked to the complexity of those molecules. But in terms of implementing them and having the interchangeability statement available, they could basically be handled in the same way as generics. So that was a learning for a take-home message for the HTA bodies. And then I think we agreed that biosimilars could be, if there are sufficient of them on the market, more than one competitor on the market, it could be a way of alleviating shortages. So that was a tour de force in interchangeability, biosimilars, and the very fruitful workshop on Wednesday.